welcome to your weekday Cup of the Word. We're in Psalm 78, and we're going to break this psalm into two sections. The first 39 verses today, and then the rest of the psalm from verse 40 onward tomorrow. This is a psalm of history. Now, a psalm of history is exactly what it sounds like. It is taking in poetic form and covering some section of time, chronology, and in this case, history of Israel, of that nation, particularly emphasizing the 10 northern tribes referred to here as Ephraim. Because of the 10 northern tribes, Ephraim was the strongest, the most powerful, had the largest landmass, so it often went by the name of Ephraim for those 10 tribes after the Civil War and the breakup between the two nations. And the point the psalmist says of this entire psalm is to point out the history of what led the 10 tribes to the real horrible place that they ended up being, where they would eventually be destroyed by God, so that future generations would learn a lesson from the faithlessness of those in the past. So it's not necessarily what you'd think of as a positive, upbeat psalm. It's based off of negative things that have happened. It goes all the way back to the children of Israel being led out of the land of Egypt and being out in the wilderness, and how God gave them water and God gave them manna. He gave them water from the rocks and manna, bread literally to just pick up off the ground. He saved them from battles, and yet they were still afraid to go fight. And all of these things in their history, and basically it came down to, no matter how much water God gave them, they would always complain. No matter how much food they were given by God, they would still be upset that it wasn't the right type. He'd give them manna, they were upset. He gave them quail, they were still upset. It didn't matter how much He punished them. He gave them positive things, and then He also gave them negative discipline, as a father would. And it seemed to never be enough. There was a character problem with the nation. And that even when they were reprimanded by God and they took their punishment, it was such a short-lived change. So that there was a momentary return to God, but it never seemed to stick. There was always this short-term faithfulness followed by a long-term faithlessness. And so this psalm is putting this emphasis on the problem has never been with God. It's never been with the circumstances in their lives. Israel wasn't shaped because they didn't have enough food or water or comfortable places to live or cities to dwell in or enough land to provide for their needs. It was never those things that shaped the problems Israel had. It was always a lack of trust in God. It was a character problem. And so this psalm is emphasizing that in the hopes that future generations would be taught to do differently, to have a more persevering attitude of faithfulness towards God, so that the generation now would turn to their children and say, be better. We wish more for you than we have for ourselves. After all, that is a biblical concept, to train your children up in the way that they ought to go. And sometimes the way they ought to go is not the way mom and dad went, or grandma and grandpa and so forth. So this psalm is based off of that idea of let's get the future looking brighter than the past has. That's your Daily Cup, and we'll see you tomorrow.